What's up, YouTube? This is True Raw 4 TV. Alright, so uh, this is a requested video from one of my subscribers. They wanted me to compare two players who are considered by most the greatest defensive forces the game has ever seen. Although there are other opinions, other players that will pop up. Maybe Kim Mutombo is one of them. Ben Wallace is another one. But these two guys, when you look at their longevities and their dominance at that position, these two guys step up more in people's mind, pop up more in people's mind than any other particular players. Hakeem Olajuwon and Bill Russell. Of these two, who is the greatest defensive player? Bill Russell, by reputation, has been considered the greatest defender of all time. However, there isn't as much game footage around, and the people who actually watched him play, most of them now have long passed the scene. There's more footage, more evidence with Hakeem Olajuwon. Olajuwon is the all-time leader in official block shots. I believe he's a two-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner, and he's led the league in stats, defensive stats that are available now that may not have been available when Bill Russell played. So let's look at this. First, let's look at Hakeem Olajuwon. All right, so Hakeem Olajuwon led the league in block shots. As I said before, he's the official all-time blocks leader. He's led the league in total block shots twice, total rebounding twice, total offensive rebounding once, and that was his rookie year. But how many times did he lead the league in blocks? Because we go by blocks per game and not total blocks. He led the league in blocks per game. I believe it was 3 times. Yeah, 3 times. 1989, 1990, 1990-91, and 1992, 1993. Olajuwon led the NBA in blocks. He also led the league in rebounding twice, 1988-89 and 89-90, 13.5 rebounds per game and 14 respectively. The 3 years he led the league in blocks, 4.6 blocks, 3.9 blocks, and 4.2 blocks per game. Olajuwon's career block average is 3.1, and his prime years, what would be his prime years? Would you say his rookie year, or let's go his second year. From his second year all the way to 96, Olajuwon's career stats were, in his peak, 24.6 points, 12.3 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.9 steals, 3.6 blocks, 51.4% shooting from the floor, and 72% from the free throw line. Another stat that Olajuwon was able to rack up plentiful of was steals. Matter of fact, Olajuwon averaged 2 or more steals per game several times, which is unusual for a center. Matter of fact, his highest average was 88-89 when he averaged 2.6 steals per game, which nearly had him leading the NBA in that category. That's a stat that normally perimeter players or sometimes swingmen lead the league in. As a matter of fact, I believe the player led the league in steals that year was John Stockton with 3 a game. But in 5 different seasons, Olajuwon averaged 2 or more steals per game. He's I think he's the only center, if I'm not mistaken, he's the only center who have officially registered over 2,000 career steals. Let's go to some advanced metrics here. Olajuwon led the league in defensive win shares 4 consecutive years, from 1986-87 to 1989-1990, and he had 94.5 career defensive win shares. He led the league in block percentage twice, 1989-1990 and 1992-93, and he led the league in offensive rebounding percentage once, and that was his rookie year when he got an unusual proportion of offensive rebounds. So Olajuwon, man, he was a great defensive player. As I said before, I believe he won Defensive Player of the Year twice, if I'm not mistaken. His impact on the team defensively was very noticeable when we look at the game. For instance, just off the top of my head, one of the greatest plays he ever made was perhaps game-saving block in the 1994 NBA Finals. I think it was Game 6 when he blocked John Stark's three-point attempt. It was a corner three. That potentially saved the game. Now, that's not saying that the shot would have went in, but had that shot gone in, if I'm not mistaken, if that shot had gone in, that would have won New York the game in the championship. So, Olajuwon's defensive exploits were phenomenal. Now, I don't have the time to look at each one of the teams that Olajuwon was on, but as far as his overall impact with the Houston Rockets, they were usually known as a great defensive team, but in that stretch, they weren't as dominant as, say, the Boston Celtics as far as on the defensive end. Let's see if I could find some. Let's see if I can find some stats. Yeah. During the era that Olajuwon played in, even though the Rockets were a great defensive team, there were other teams that had reputation for being even better defensively. Number one, the Bad Boy Pistons. Then, of course, you had the Chicago Bulls. They were known for being a great defensive team. Although Olajuwon himself presented a conundrum for most teams, especially the Chicago Bulls, especially the first Chicago Bulls team. He was a conundrum as far as them being able to game plan for him. It was very difficult for them to do so. But make no mistake about it, the Houston Rockets were a great defensive team. And you could also make an argument that, well, look, there were only generally 8 to 10 teams when Bill Russell played, maybe later on 14 teams. But Olajuwon had to contend with 23 to 29 teams during his tenure in the NBA. So there was more competition, right? So you can make that argument. But then you can make a counter argument by saying, well, since there were fewer teams, that means that there weren't the quality of competition was higher. Since there were 8 teams, that means you're going up against the best every night. You're going up against the best players and the best centers, as opposed to since the league was bigger, has gotten bigger, that tends to dilute the talent pool over time. After a certain period of time, that tends to dilute the talent pool. So you can make that argument. Let's look at Bill Russell for a second. Now, Bill Russell led the NBA in rebounding 5 different years: 56, 57, 57, 58, 58, 59, 63, 64, and 64, 65. And he has the second highest rebounding average of all time, 22.5. Now, unfortunately, back then, we didn't split offensive and defensive rebounds. It was just total rebounds. But I would get the impression, for reputation, that Bill Russell was very great at defensive rebounding. So I'm not sure if he led the league in offensive rebounding a lot. Perhaps by default the first few years before Wilt got in there. But I'm pretty sure Wilt probably led the NBA in offensive rebounding almost every year he was in the league. We have no idea how many times Bill Russell led the league in blocks, but we do have a feeling, general consensus feeling, that if blocks were counted from 1946 onward, or at least from Bill Russell's rookie year onward, then the two shot block leaders would be Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, and it wouldn't be very close at all. All right, how many times they led the league in blocks? We don't know all of that. A lot of this stuff is just guesstimate. We can also guesstimate that Bill Russell would have been on the all-defensive first teams virtually every year of his career. Every year of his career. He'll be on the all-defensive first teams every year of his career. Whereas with Hakeem Olajuwon, let's check something out here. Olajuwon was on all-defensive first team 5 times. All-defensive second team 4 times. Bill Russell would have been on the all-defensive first team. I'm thinking every year. Maybe 1 or 2 years he would have been on the all-defensive second team. Maybe. So I have a strong feeling that Bill Russell dominates in that defensive statistic. I don't know how many times Bill Russell led the league in blocks because of the presence of Wilt Chamberlain, but I think it would have been more than twice, like I said before. It probably would have been like 3, 4, maybe 5 times he led the league in block shots. If there was a Defensive Player of the Year award, goodness. Maybe 8 or 9 times he would have won that award, 8 or 9 times. I'm guesstimating, like I said. One defensive stat that is in Bill Russell's favor is that I believe he's the all-time leader in defensive win shares. Let's see if I can find that stat. Yeah, so wow. Yeah, so Bill Russell had 133.6 career defensive win shares. He's number 1 all time in that category. That's where he impacted the game on its greatest level. From 57, 58 to 66, 67, he led the league in defensive win shares every year. The only year that he didn't lead it was 67, 68, and I believe that was when he was eclipsed by Wilt Chamberlain. That was the one year I said he may have been all defensive. That's the year in my head I was thinking that probably the only year where he'd be second all defensive. And then his last year he led the league in defensive win shares again, 9.9. But some of these years is crazy. 63, 64, 16. That's crazy. That's crazy. Also, another stat that shows you the significance of Bill Russell's defense is that here we are in 2024, and those Celtics teams still have the highest regular season defensive rating per as opposed to the rest of the league in the history of the NBA. I believe 7 of the top 10 defensive ratings as far as teams is concerned, 7 of the top 10 involve Bill Russell's Celtics. And to give you an example of how impactful Bill Russell was, every year that he played in the NBA, the Boston Celtics were number 1 in defensive rating in the NBA. Before Bill Russell got there, the Celtics were a weak defensive team. Matter of fact, I've said this before in videos. The Celtics, before Bill Russell got there, sort of remind me of like that Rockets team with Russell Westbrook and James Harden. Why do I say that? They were a pretty potent offensive team that was undersized and weak defensively. Relatively weak defensively. They were a team good enough to go to the playoffs, but not enough firepower. Not enough firepower as far as big men and rebounding and defense to get over the hump. That's why Bob Cousy, when we look at all his career triple doubles, most of them came before Bill Russell got there, because he was forced to crash the boards to help out, because they were a bad rebounding team and a bad interior defensive team. So Bill Russell joins the team, they become one of the great defensive teams of all time. And when he leaves, they become a below average defensive team. And that's seen in the stats. When Bill Russell's last year, I think Boston was 48-34. When he leaves, along with Sam Jones, let's be fair, but Bill Russell was the defensive force with that duo. When Bill Russell leaves, they fall apart. They go to like 34-48, and they don't qualify for the playoffs. Now, mind you, Havlicek was still there. And a lot of the other great players are still there, but they fell apart. It took them several years to recover from the retirement of Bill Russell, especially the defensive end. They were just not the same team. Olajuwon had a great impact on that team. Absolutely, but not to that extent. Matter of fact, you can even make an argument that Ben Wallace, his absence had a bigger impact on those Pistons teams than Olajuwon did in some years. You can make that argument. So I got to go with this. I have to go with Bill Russell, man. Bill Russell was 6'10", 220 pounds, sometimes 240, 230, whatever. And the ability for Bill Russell in his prime to guard all 5 positions, and not just with switches, like he really could keep it up. Like, some guys, they may be able to play 1 or 2 sequences, you know what I'm saying? Make some highlight reels, make a good difference. Hell, Kevin Love shut down Steph Curry one sequence in the 2016 final. You think we can keep that up? Hell no, he couldn't keep that up. But Bill Russell could keep that up in his prime. He could literally guard all 5 positions when he was younger. And he had no weaknesses. Like, he was a tremendous one-on-one defender. He was a basketball player with exceptionally high IQ. When I say no weaknesses, I'm talking about on the defensive end. We know his weaknesses offensively. Tremendous pressure defender. Great on-ball defender, great help defender. From what I understand, he was great in the passing lanes as well, getting steals. When he blocked shots, he didn't block them into the stands. What he tried to do is usually when he blocked shots, he tried to tap the shot into the direction of one of the ball handlers or one of the backcourt players to initiate the famed Celtic fast break. So, I'm sorry, but when I look at his IQ, when I look at some of the other stats, his impact as far as the team and the championships, I gotta go with Bill Russell. Man. Guy was a workhorse. Even though Olajuwon, you could argue, was the better, more skilled player, obviously, Bill Russell's defense was what he was. He popularized defense. He was he was, to me, the greatest defensive player of all time. Now, you can argue whether he's overrated in other aspects of his game, but he's the greatest defensive player of all time, in my opinion. Tell me what you guys think.